Howdy, folks. Welcome to the podCAST Iron. My name is Laura Mullen Vermilia, and on this podcast, I interview members of the cast iron art community in order to inspire, educate, and spread ideas about iron casting and cast iron art. I am extremely ecstatic to tell you that our guest on today's show is the one and only Wayne Potratz. Wayne has been the #1 top requested interview since I started this endeavor, and it was such an honor to finally get a chance to chat with him and record his story. Wayne, thank you for giving me the opportunity to interview you and learn how you came across iron casting, as well as why you see it as an artistic material. The work you did and still do to help proliferate the technical knowledge of this material has changed many of our lives, and I think it's safe to say that you are one of the main factors that enabled this community to grow into the splendid thing that it is today. The podcast Iron Show is sponsored in part by supporters on Patreon. So thank you to everyone who has joined as a Patreon member to help me afford the production costs of this show. And as always, you know that I am so proud to say that this episode is brought to you by our top supporter, Sloss Metal Arts, which is a national center for iron casting and metal art. For more information about the Sloss Metal Arts program, visit their website, which is slossmetalarts.com, but also follow them on Instagram at slossmetalarts. And if you want to keep up to date with the national conference that Sloss Metal Arts will be hosting this upcoming April, then you should follow the conference handle, which is NCCCIAP on Instagram. And also keep up to date on their website by checking in periodically, and their website is www.nccciap.com. Now, let's get into this interview. Thank you so much for tuning in today, and please enjoy. Well, Wayne Potratz, welcome to the podcast Iron. Thank you so much for being on the show today.
Yeah, you're welcome. I'm happy to be here.
Well, Wayne, it's an amazing honor to have you do this little chat with me. And so let's just start off with our very first question, which is, well, Wayne, who the hell are you anyways?
Well, I'm Wayne Potratz. I live in Minneapolis, Minnesota. I'm an artist, and my creative research, for the most part, has been involved in metal casting, specifically investigating various historical and ethnic techniques for casting metal. I went to graduate school at Berkeley, and I taught in high school for a couple of years, and I taught at a junior college for 1 year, and then I got a position at the University of Minnesota, where I taught sculpture and metal casting for 45 years. Now I'm retired. I'm professor emeritus and scholar of the college emeritus. I was the first artist to be named a scholar of the College of Liberal Arts at the University of Minnesota. I still maintain my studio in Minneapolis, and I'm still making sculpture.
Fabulous. Thank you. That was a wonderful distilled essence of who you are. And so I'm really excited to dive deeper into and talk in more detail about all of those things. But let's kind of go back and maybe pick your brain about any childhood memories that you have related to early introductions to art or to working with your
Sure.
hands.
I have two grandfathers. My paternal grandfather was a roofer, and my paternal grandfather was a plumber, and my father was a cabinet maker. So I grew up around tools, and I grew up around the idea of work with your hands. And my father had a shop in the basement, and so I think about it now. I had kind of free reign to just futz around down there. There was wood, and there were fasteners and glues and tools, and so I spent a lot of time as a boy, kind of just putzing around in the shop downstairs. He wouldn't let me use the table saw, but all the other stuff I could use. Um, so that was when looking back on it, that was very important to my development as an artist. The ability to just play. Play to me is a very important part of creative activity. And then the second thing about childhood is I had a really wonderful um, art teacher in grade school. Her name was Mrs. Bisbee. And when I look back on it, her assignments were incredibly perceptive, um, and introduced us very early to the idea of abstract thinking, visual thinking. And I actually, when I was in college, I actually went back and visited her for an assignment I had, and kind of thanked her about being kind of an influence in my life. So those are maybe the two kind of childhood remembrances that spurred me on the way to being an artist. And also, I was kind of a loner,
Mm.
so I like to spend a lot of time in my room, and I like to draw and stuff like that. So those are those are maybe the points that pointed me in the direction of art. I liked art, and
Hmm.
so that's that's what I did.
And so then did that lead you into the art path like right away through
Yeah,
high school and into college?
I took 4 years of art in high school,
Uh-huh.
and I won a few kind of award-like things. There was a high school. They still have it, the best 100
Uh-huh.
art in the Twin Cities. I was in that a couple of times, and I had a really good art teacher in high school, Mr. Pettit,
Hmm.
and so when it came to going to college, I went to Macalester College, which is right about 6 or 7 blocks from my house. So I lived at home, and I was an art major, but actually I was an art and education major. So I majored in art and I minored in education. So I finished my degree, and then my two mentors, Jerry Redchrist, who was a wonderful painter, and Tony Capone, the consummate Italian stone sculptor, um, uh, said, "Well, you ought to go to graduate school." And they said, "You ought to go to graduate school somewhere else other than Minnesota. Don't go to the University of Minnesota. Go somewhere else." So well, I thought, well, let's go to a coast. So I thought, well, let's go to California. So I applied to one graduate school, which was the University of California at Berkeley.
Hmm.
And I got accepted, and there was no MFA then
Okay.
at, 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 at Berkeley. So I got an MA in sculpture, so
Hmm.
2 year program.
What kind of work were you making at that time, either in undergrad or?
Uh, I was I was casting metal because one of one well, I did some welding, uh, and I studied with Harold Paris, and he was a sculptor that did a lot of metal casting, along with Volkas and Don Haskins and people like that who were at the University of California at that time. So
Mm.
there was well, actually, when I my second year there, we got a new foundry, and so that was really nice. So I
Did
pretty much did metal casting, and my thesis show was a series of cast metal works.
did you do casting in undergrad as well, or just when you got to grad?
Yes, I had the good fortune of doing an internship. It was a small foundry uh, in Mendota. It was the Mendota Sculpture Foundry, and there were two guys that ran it, and they were doing very silly things back. They were standard investment casters, so they were doing silly things like they cast a ham sandwich and pies, and because they were burning stuff out. I
Yeah.
cast a hat nailed to a board,
Oh dear.
stuff
Okay.
like that. So I was, um, it, so that was my early introduction to casting because we didn't have a foundry at
Okay.
Ocala.
Okay. And so it was investment you said, and was it bronze
Yeah, it
or
was a bronze casting
okay.
foundry. Yeah, there
All
was
right.
no iron there.
So then fast forward into grad at Berkeley. And so you're doing more casting there.
Yes, we had we had an outside foundry in the foundry yard outside of Krober Hall, and then the environmental design building came online. I think my second year there, and maybe it was in the middle of that first year. I don't remember. Um, and so I did bronze casting pretty much exclusively.
And was it using the knowledge from the other foundry that you internshipped at with the
Oh yeah,
investment?
I was familiar with casting. So at the very first meeting of the class, Harold Paris says, "Anybody here know anything about metal casting?" And I raised my hand, and he said, "You're the teaching assistant." So I got it was kind of different way of being appointed a teaching assistant back then, much more formal now. So I became a teaching assistant. So I knew how to run Burnout kiln and knew a little bit about metal. But like anything, it's always the more you know, the more there is to know.
Yes.
That that was pretty evident right away for me. Um, I thought I knew a lot, but you find out pretty quickly that there's a whole lot to it that is a lifelong learning experience.
I think that to realize that is a rite of passage in itself, but then also to not be intimidated by that, to be excited by that is something that, because it can definitely be overwhelming when you realize, oh man, I'm just scraping the surface of the iceberg. But let that be exciting.
Well, if you're going to teach, you ought to be learning. I mean, I think that's an important thing. Um, Actually, I think Gregory Bateson is a philosopher, kind of sociologist, thinker, who coined the phrase "deuto learning," which is when you learn how to learn, then that's when learning really takes place.
So your investment casting
Right.
there. And so then how did that roll into further development?
After I graduated, I taught for one summer session, beginning sculpture at Berkeley, and then I already had a job at Mounds View High School because I was a student teacher there, and Mounds View is a northern suburb of the Twin Cities. So I came right back to the Twin Cities after my teaching at Berkeley, and I rented a store and I had a studio in the front, and I lived in the back. And I taught at Mounds View High School for a couple of years. I taught sculpture, drawing, painting, ceramics. I taught senior art survey, which was an art history course for seniors. So I taught all of those for a couple of years, and then at that point, this would have been 1968. 1968. The state of Minnesota started the community college system.
Okay.
So there was a job opening at the then Lakewood Community College, which was actually housed in a grade school. So I taught in the kindergarten room, which I thought was appropriate. And I had the same kind of thing. I had 7 different preparations: drawing, painting, ceramics, printmaking, sculpture, figure modeling. I can't remember all the courses I taught. So I was kind of the Renaissance man there teaching all of this stuff. But the sculpture was always um, my my love.
Mm.
So I think it came. It I was doing both painting and sculpture in undergraduate, and I started to look at my paintings and realize that they were kind of paintings of sculptures. They were paintings with three-dimensional forms. There was a lot of three-dimensional sense in the paintings, and so when I had to make a choice at Berkeley as to whether to enroll in painting or sculpture, I picked sculpture. Of course, I was ruining that the other day when I had to move my studio.
Mm.
Oh, if this was painting, this would have been over weeks and weeks ago. But
Maybe. I don't know
yeah,
what type of paintings. I don't know what type of paintings you're doing, but so my day job is I'm an art handler and I move whatever art I need to keep my job. And but I've moved some
massive.
substantial
Yeah,
paintings
yeah,
for days. And
right.
so, but that doesn't mean that you wouldn't have been done. So, where did this lead to, this teaching job at the community college?
Well, early 1969, um, Stephen Daly, who is professor emeritus from UT, was teaching at Minnesota, um, and he was a student of Julius Schmidt at Cranbrook, and he left to teach in California, Northern California. And a friend of mine was teaching at there and said, "Hey, there's a job open." And this were the days when the chairman would just call people up and say, "Yeah, we have a job. Would you like it?" So my friend got me an interview with the chair, and I just got hired because I could teach metal casting.
Yeah.
And uh, I was living in a house in St. Paul, and there was a garage in the back, and it was a big double garage, and I had built a foundry in there when I was teaching high school. So I was casting while I was in high school,
What
and
did that look like?
it was a burnout kiln and a home built furnace and home
Uh-huh.
built shank and pickup tongs, and
So like a one-man
it was
operation.
all one person. Well, I had help. I had another
Yeah. Well,
friend who
even
would come over to help me pour because I had a number 30 crucible that I could.
okay.
So,
Okay.
so
And you said investment burnout, so you're still doing
right. But
investment
when
include.
when I got the job, Steve Daly was teaching melt out from sand molds.
Okay.
So I thought, wow, I better learn this. So um, his students, he had made an arrangement with a supplier that could get this kit of
Uh-huh.
resin and catalyst, and so I started figuring this out for myself,
Mm-hmm.
and started doing these melt out molds and some sand molds, and so I was prepared then when I started teaching the course at the University of Minnesota in the fall of 1969. So, and then went from there, went to various kinds of forms of casting, ceramic shell, sand molds, and then later on clay molds and more kind of primitive. And I don't think that's a pejorative term, but some people do primitive casting methods.
So can you lead me a little bit through that line of the story of, starting there? Was there shell already set up there? Or
No, I mean there. When I came into the Holman building, it was a repurposed building. Of course, that's the story of art departments.
yep.
There wasn't even a tool room, and I thought, man, how how do you keep control over the tools? So during my during the summer, I wasn't even on salary. I came in and got access, and I built a little tool room and got ready to teach there. Um, so I started as an instructor. They don't even have that position anymore, and I taught. We were on quarters. I taught three courses uh, uh, a quarter plus plus a night class because the salary was so low. My wife was making much more money than I was. As a matter of fact, I moved from high school to teaching at the community college. I took a pay cut
Mm.
And I took a pay cut to move to to the University of Minnesota. So I had a lot of courses to teach. Then I
Hmm.
also taught summer session, two
Wow.
courses in summer. So that was a lot of teaching in the early years.
So at this point, had you been introduced to iron casting?
No, this is a pretty interesting story. When I uh, the the foundry in the Holman building was this little tiny back room building. It wasn't even a building; it was in the studio, and really poor ventilation and everything. And sitting back there was this cupola, and I didn't even know what it was. And Steve Daly had run an iron pour in the summer
Oh my goodness.
inside this thing, and he just left the cupola. It was an 8 inch.
Okay. Wow.
Uh,
Okay.
they're hard to run. Harder to run. So a couple of weeks into my teaching, this kid shows up and he said, "Hi, my name is Cliff Prokop." And if you know Cliff now, he is just retired from Keystone College,
Hmm.
Pennsylvania. Cliff said, I took this workshop from Daly, and I'd really like to borrow the cupola. And I'd like to set it up at Mankato and do an iron pour down there because he was going to Mankato State. He had come up for the workshop. I said, "Oh yeah, you can take the cupola. I don't think I'm going to do any iron here." So he set this cupola up, and in the spring quarter, he invited us down. So bunch of my students, mainly advanced students, we went down to Mankato, and he had the cupola set up in the middle of a courtyard with dormitories all around. It was in a grassy area, and he ran this cupola, and I had so much fun. I thought this is really good. This is a good thing. There was like a lot of involvement by the students, and it was a cooperative community kind of thing. You couldn't do it by yourself, just metal casting in general.
Yeah.
So at the end of the pour, I said, "Cliff, I want my cupola back." So that summer, I did. That was the summer of 1970. I did the first during the summer. So I did the first iron pour, and then I started doing them every year for 45 years. And then probably I used to teach a fall night class, and I started doing iron pour at night too. So I did about 35 years at night, and 45 years of the Minnesota iron pour. So it always happened in the spring, and for a long time it was outside till we got a new foundry, and then I built a bigger cupola, and it was inside.
Mm.
I ran the 8 inch cupola for a long time.
Yeah, I definitely want to get to the new foundry and the bigger cupola and everything, but I also want to spend a little bit of time on this learning process that you must have had to go through to ca make
Yeah,
yourself familiar with how to run
learning by
iron.
learning by mistakes, and learning by um, well, for example, we used to the tapo was not designed properly, and so you'd had this chisel and you had sledgehammers you're trying to break through to get to the iron. And I thought this can't be right. So I went to a foundry in Northeast Minneapolis, and I remember watching the furnace master there. He had a long pick, and he had a double aught whiting, so it held, I don't know, 500 to 1,000 pounds. And I remember him going up to the cupola and going boop, 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 and the bot just fell out and the iron ran out, and I went, "I want your bot mix." And he said, "Well, there are two things, and one is the design of the tap hole, which is two cones, an inside cone and an outside cone, separated by just 1 inch of the tap hole. The tap
Okay.
hole was only 1 inch, but it was a cone going in from the outside and a cone on the inside, so the tap hole stayed hot. And then the pot mix was 1/3 sand, 1/3 wood flour, and 1/3 clay. Uh, and it was easy to pick out. And that was the end of using chisels and sledgehammers to get the iron out of out of the cupola. So after these iron pours, I remember one iron pour. Butch Jack showed up from Morris, Minnesota. He was teaching up at University of Minnesota Morris with
Yeah.
about 10 students and all these molds. And the iron pour went from 9 in the morning till 9 at night. And I went, I have to build a bigger cupola.
Yeah. Yeah.
I built a 12-inch cupola. And then later on, when we got the foundry inside, I built a 24-inch cupola. That was the cupola.
Mhm.
Just lean forward and my chair's squeaking a little bit.
It's okay. I'll be able to edit the squeaking out.
Okay.
Um, so when you were like doing all of the trial and error and learning through error, who were you going to get any advice or
Well, the second Minnesota iron pour, we had a guest artist, and so I was invited other schools that didn't have iron or schools that did have iron, and guest artists. I started to write grants and bring guest artists for this event. It soon developed into a kind of an event, with well, one of the early T-shirts or early iron pours, we were screening T-shirts and pouring iron at the same time. So there started to be a T-shirt for each of the. I think the first one was like 71 or 72, the first T-shirt, um, and um, and then there was a after party that got to be a big deal, and workshops and guest artist lectures and symposia and stuff like that. So I got more sophisticated at getting money from the college and from the department for visiting artists and for materials and supplies, and had some good contacts in the community, the foundry community here.
mhm. And so were your students at this point making or well, I don't know exactly what point we're at to be completely honest with you. So we could just drop into anywhere in your timeline, but the molds, did they start being um resin sand, still
Yeah,
burnout resin sand or
I moved very quickly. Well, one of the things I found out is that students were horrible standard investment makers.
okay.
They're just, I mean, if you don't do it right, if you don't fill up the investment right, you get horizontal checks. And then if you don't have the right mix, you get vertical checks. And sometimes you couldn't even see the casting. There were so many flashings on the piece. And I thought, there's got to, I think this meltout, I was getting better castings with meltout. So I just stopped teaching standard investment. And later on, maybe, I don't know, about 5 or 6 years um, in my teaching, another professor there started a little ceramic shell setup, and so then when she retired, I took over the ceramic shell there. So, and when we built the new foundry, well, I've had two new foundries actually.
Yeah, tell me
Old
about both of
foundry at
them.
Holman Building. We moved out of that into the West Bank Art Building, and they built a hot shop there. That came about because the Holman Building, we were on the ceramics and sculpture were on the first floor, and then on the second floor was the furniture repair shop. And these guys were sitting on lacquer and turpentine and paint and stuff. And so
Yeah.
when the graduate student blew up a kiln, there were no safety equipment on anything. These are all home built everything. So he
Yeah.
was lighting the kiln and he couldn't get it lit, and finally stuck the torch in there, and it was a brick front. Blew. He wasn't in front of the kiln, thank goodness.
Yeah.
Blew the whole thing out. Well, these guys upstairs just totally freaked out, and that's how we got a hot shot. Wasn't because the artist wanted it. It was because the furniture repair shop were fearing for their lives.
Yeah.
So then that was at the West Bank Art Building. They built an addition, and
Okay.
in 2013 we got a whole new building, and so kind of a state of the art built foundry with 20-foot ceilings and bridge crane and the whole thing. Good ventilation. The ventilation in the second foundry wasn't particularly good. So.
Hmm. So tell me about your, I would say, I guess, well, I don't want to call it like a traditional furnace because that isn't the right language to use, but I guess tell me what about, can you walk me through a little bit of the design of what you feel like your most, I don't know, favorite or most successful furnace build?
Well, I mean, it's actually Cliff Prokop. Cliff Prokop, actually, one of my students, Chris Dash, saw this drawing in an old foundry manual. It was called the Shaw Walker Coupolette.
Uh-huh.
It was just a drawing. There were no dimensions.
Okay.
And he sent that drawing to Cliff, and Cliff figured out the dimensions that would work.
Okay.
And Cliff said, "Hey, I'm doing this coupolette, and you can like a couple people can run it. You don't. It's got a lid, and it keeps the air. The lid keeps the air down in the melt zone, and
Mm-hmm.
you can batch melt. You can put in 100, you can put in 50, you can put in 200, whatever the capacity was." So I said, "Send me the plans." And in 1980, I want to say 1986. Yeah, 86 or 87, 86 or 87, I can't remember. We built this cupola, and I took my cupola offline and I just put the cupola
Yeah.
in. And so it was on a track. So it would
Oh,
roll out and you could pop the lid and charge it, and then you push it back underneath the stack because we were inside. So it was under the stack that went up, you know, above the roof line about 10 or 15, well, actually more like 15 feet. Um, and that was just the ticket because there wasn't the need to have a charging crew and rotating the charging crew. And I
yeah.
mean, uh, iron pours have to be organized,
Yes.
and so it was much easier to say, okay, we'll just dump this in. You don't have to be up there on the charging platform. We actually had a built-in charging platform,
Mm-hmm.
and the at the old cupola, there was just a hole in the stack, and then you dump the iron and the coke and the iron and the alloying ingredients in through this hole, and then close the hole back up.
Hmm. Okay.
So the couplet was just the ticket. And so when we did the first iron conference in 1988, um, we sent I got money and we shipped the couplet down there. And
Okay.
this time the word had spread. So Butchie Jack down at Lamar University had built a smaller version. So
Okay.
mine was 24 inches. So that meant 300 pounds in the well.
Wow.
So that's a lot of iron to deal with. So we had a
Yeah.
big uh, ladle, and then we would pour off into hand ladles.
Mm-hmm.
So the couplet was a game changer for me, uh,
Mm-hmm.
having built two other cupolas
Mm-hmm.
before that,
Mm-hmm.
one outside and one inside. I soon learned that I didn't want to run the 8 incher anymore because it just did 100 pounds every 20 minutes, and
Oh.
you start to have a big crew and it takes forever. So
And so then, so there were two other cupola iterations before the couplet?
yeah, there was one outside, and then when we moved inside, I built a little bigger well, uh, and used the. I think that cupola was 12 inches ID or 16. I can't remember.
Mm-hmm.
The
Yeah.
cupolet's 24. It also means that you don't have to break the iron up as
Yeah.
because it's 1/12 to 1/10 diameters. That's what's the size of the iron should be when it goes into a cupola.
Yeah. And I feel like the least amount that you have to break iron,
Right.
the the better, personally.
So one story about the cupola.
Yeah.
So Melanie Van Houten, who is a sculptor who has the Josephine Sculpture
Mhm.
Park. She was a graduate student of mine, and she said, "Wayne, I've got this big casting I want to do," and it was actually a 45 piece mold of a big rope. It was a big rope about I think it was the rope was 2 or 3 inches in diameter, but she
Uh-huh.
crocheted into a big knot. She made a mold of that big crocheted knot. And I said, well, what's this going to weigh? So we had to figure that out. We took the length of the rope times the diameter. We figured out it was going to be like 600, 600 plus pounds. And I went, okay, Melanie.
Ah,
So what we did is I had another guy who built a bigger ladle with a burner on the top.
oh, okay.
So it had a burner top in the top. So she broke her iron up into pieces like this
Okay.
so that we could put 400 pounds in at first and then 300 pounds on the second tap. So the first tap was 400 pounds and the iron was just like the slag was right up against the twig. The twig. It was pretty nerve wracking. So we tapped out 400 pounds and then tapped out 300. So we had 700 pounds in the ladle. And
Hmm.
she poured that sucker and it came up and it was pretty darn good. So that's the biggest casting we ever made in the foundry,
Wow.
U of M.
That's a great story. Great accomplishment. That's,
Yeah, yeah. It was, there's some students when they walk in the door, they're going to be special. And I have had a number of them. A lot of them have been women, actually, which
mm,
is good to know.
yeah.
Melanie is certainly one of those persons who I knew was going to be a success. So, and she has continued to do that with her park down in Frankfort, Kentucky.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
So what did the iron community look like? Kind of, I guess from your introduction to iron, but then as it developed, like what is your perspective of how this family kind of
Well,
has spread
at
and grown?
at the first conference, we could only identify what 4 or 5 cupolas in the whole country. Julia Schmidt had his continuous tapper,
Hmm.
which had the smaller cupola. I had my bigger cupola. Tom Geip had his an 8-inch cupola. George Beasley, of course, had a cupola, and Cliff, but that was about it. And so at that first conference, it was Schmidt, Geip, Butch Jack, and myself at the Iron Pour that we had at Sloss, that first conference in 1988.
Hmm.
Uh, and the reason for the conference was a couple things. One was to demystify the process,
Hmm.
and two was to expand the opportunity for people to diversify the community
Yeah.
and to have an exhibition and to celebrate. And so when uh, Tom Geip and I started this conference, we did it before the age of the computer, so it was all done by phone and letters.
Hmm.
We got a lot of money, and Tom was the one that suggested Sloss furnaces. So we went down there and we visited, and Randy Lawrence was the director then. And Randy was this big, tall labor historian from um, West Virginia. And, he said, "Yeah, this is a good idea. Yeah, we'll support this." And so we had support from the UAB and Sloss Furnaces and the museum there at Birmingham, and Kohler Company gave money for scholarships, and the Ductile Iron Society and AFS, and so we raised enough money, and then we thought, well, what if we gave a conference and nobody came? But in April of 1988, about 250 people showed up from all around the country, and Canada, Belgium, UK, Scotland, and England. Can't remember where else. Maybe Germany, maybe, and Japan. And And the Japanese showed up. I remember this very distinctly through another contact, Mr. Totsu. He was the dean of the Tokyo Fine Arts University and the head of the traditional casting department. And he showed up with a friend of his who just came to the last conference. His name is Keiichi Eda, 13th generation iron caster. And they showed up and they presented us with an envelope inside of which was 700 brand new $100 bills, which is the Japanese way. They always give you uncirculated bills as a gift from the Sato Art Craft Foundation in Japan. So they came they came with a donation to the conference. So they demonstrated swept clay molding, which is how I got started in all the Japanese and Asian
Okay.
methods of casting.
That was the original connection.
The original connection happened this way in 1980. Tom and I and a couple of our students did an iron pour at an Abana conference
Okay.
in California.
Mm-hmm.
So at an Abana conference, there's always an exhibition. Everybody can put in one work, and I'm going to this exhibition. I see this really beautiful little cast iron vessel. I went, wow, who made this? And I looked at the name, and it was James Stewart. So James Stewart, who's this guy? I don't know this guy.
Yeah.
And so I was looking through the program, and I see James Stewart is translating for the Japanese blacksmith who was demonstrating. So I went to that demonstration and I introduced myself. And it turns out that James Stewart was the first gaijin, first foreigner to ever complete the traditional casting course at Tokyo Fine Arts University. And so when we had this conference, when we were planning this conference, James said, "Listen, I think I can get some Japanese people to come over and demonstrate." And I said, "Okay, let's do it." And so that was the beginning of my Japanese connection, which was very important to my development as an artist, and very important to my aesthetic because I'm interested in Asian aesthetics
Mm-hmm.
and the way in which it permeates all of life, especially in Japan, right away from the way they arrange a breakfast tray to the way they wrap a present or even wrap a gift, something you buy in a department store is always beautifully done. So I like that about it. So I've been to Japan a lot, China, Korea. So that got me started on the whole investigation of other ways to cast metal, and that helped a lot because I figured out pretty quickly at the University of Minnesota that the perfect grant for an artist is please give me money so I can play around in my studio.
Yeah.
In academia, no one is going to give you any money for that. But what I figured out was that like a scholar with words or a scholar with numbers who like to go to places, the libraries and conferences in other parts of the world, and gain knowledge and then bring that back to their students. I could get money to travel,
Mm-hmm.
and so I got really good at that. So I've been a lot of places in the world on the University of Minnesota's uh, dime, so to speak.
Well, I feel like that benefits the entire community though, because you bring back that knowledge and share it with your students and with
Right.
us. Yeah.
I would teach units in my casting class with clay molds and Sogata swept clay molds. And we tried doing some Chinese clay molds, piece molds. And so it was an important part of it was an important part of my learning experience too, right? I kept
Mm-hmm.
learning about
Mm-hmm.
how other cultures cast metal. And then when you go through another culture's process and you speak to their artists, you are also understanding something about their aesthetic and their approach to how they make work,
Mm-hmm.
what's important in their culture about about the sculptural objects. So I always thought that was important as well.
So I'm curious about how other cultures besides our like contemporary American or like as we're melting iron now in specifically, I guess I'm talking about in our community of iron casters, like at these conferences, we're using these furnaces with fuel coke. How are other cultures? Is that how other cultures are
Yeah, well,
iron?
as far as iron is concerned, yeah, the Japanese use smaller cupolas.
Hmm.
They have a little unique twist. They have a port up above the wind box,
Okay.
kind of just where the stack joins on, and they have a little um, spout kind of thing that comes out. And if the iron isn't hot enough, they pour it right back in and run it back through the wind box to make the iron hotter
Okay.
because they're casting all these um, sogata pieces, all these these little um, iron tetsu kettles
Yeah.
are very thin,
Hmm.
incredibly thin, and so the iron has to be hot.
Hmm.
Uh, so, but it pretty much it's variations of cupolas for.
Okay.
And at the first conference, Tom Walsh had a demonstration of melting iron in a crucible.
Uh-huh.
I mean, it takes forever, and you got to have a silicon carbide crucible, and even at that temperature, when the iron needs, it's pretty soft. It's a little wobbly, so
Uh-huh.
it just takes too long. So there aren't very many crucible melters of iron. I don't think.
No, I mean, there's always going to be exceptions to the rule and people doing their things in their backyard. And so I've seen two different diesel run,
All right,
um, you know, I batch melt, I guess I would say. Like they melt one crucible full and then they pour that.
right,
And it's fine, but if you have to cast 100 pounds,
right.
you just can't.
Right. I
Which
think
is,
it's
yeah.
I think that's fine. I think there's a whole with climate change and using fossil fuels. I mean, there is a kind of an ethical dimension there about
Yeah.
keep doing this. Is
Yeah.
this good? Though, I mean, the amount of CO2 that an iron ore puts out is pretty minimal compared to all of the other sources in the
Yeah.
world and in our culture. Though at Minnesota, the Hennepin County Pollution Control Agency I had to keep a record of the hours that I ran the cupola and
Mm-hmm.
report that every year. But it wasn't very much. I think at the most it turned out to be about 8 or 10 hours a year
Mm.
running a cupola.
Well, I have heard some, like I basically heard that at the international there was some people presenting on alternative fuel sources for iron
Yeah,
casting.
Jeremy Entwistle and
Mm-hmm.
Stephen Coles from the UK had a diesel. Um, no, it was a waste oil. They got it from a French fry
Ah,
restaurant.
okay.
Uh, but that presents problems. You have to get all the water out of it. So,
Okay.
and you have to screen it to get out French fry bits, I guess.
Yeah.
And so I don't think it works so great. I think they had trouble getting the water out and trouble with the oil that they got. But
So,
it was an interesting demonstration.
yeah, maybe steps in the right direction, but
Right. I think
needs
they're continuing
more.
to research this and tweak things,
Yeah.
and they're also developing a cokeless uh, cupola.
Okay.
So there are cokeless cupolas, and I was talking a little bit to Jeremy about how they kept the iron, uh, what they were using to keep the iron up into the above the melt zone. So there's some where they're very high temperature kind of like objects that the iron flows down through, and they don't
Okay.
melt. I think he was maybe using a stainless steel kind of grid. I'm not sure. I don't remember exactly.
Okay. Well, I'll have to have him
He's a
on
good
and
guy to.
yeah.
He'd be a good guy to interview to
Yeah.
about this kind of track
Yeah.
of the iron community.
Yeah, because his name has come up
Yeah,
before in another
yeah.
interview, so that's a good,
Upstate New York. Yeah,
yeah. Let's see, like, so where we've talked a little bit about the history, we've talked a little bit about the establishment of the national conference, we've talked
right.
a little bit about kind of like contemporary, but it's kind of like, what do you want to talk about now? Do you want to, I mean, everybody loves hearing about the development of the national conference.
Well, I think the thing that was interesting about that conference is that it did accomplish what it set out to do. It did open up the process to a lot of
Yeah.
people,
Yeah.
and it did open up the conference to women.
Mm-hmm.
Right now, women seem to be the main drivers of a lot of iron tours,
Mm-hmm.
which
Mm-hmm.
I think is great. It's perfect,
Yeah.
and um, and it did spur all of these um, other conferences. There's the Western, there's the
Mm-hmm.
National now. There are all these. I mean, the joke is, oh, St. Bernard's Grade School. Yeah, they have a cupola.
Huh.
I mean, they're everywhere.
Yeah.
Uh, uh, Little schools, and I think it has to do with the fact that it is a kind of community
Yeah.
event, and it's visually exciting. People like to watch it. It's an event,
Yeah.
uh, and it's also a chance for the public to get engaged. Making, I call them artist tiles. I don't like scratch blocks.
Okay. Yeah. I can
And
understand
the
that.
reason for that is that scratch implies a kind of just kind of scratching around rather than
Oh yeah.
something that's made with an aesthetic intent,
Yeah.
whether you're a accomplished artist or a beginner or an amateur, whatever you are. I think
Mm-hmm.
for me, it just diminishes the thing. So I like to, that's one of um, my list of things I don't like about iron pores. But I'm not going to go into that because
Okay.
I'm proposing a panel
Okay. So we won't spoil it. Yeah.
for the things I love and the things I hate about iron pores. So I've got about 4 or 5 people that I think will be fun to have on that panel. We'll
Yeah.
see if they pick it up. I don't. They haven't told me
Okay. Well, I think that that is going to be very of interest to many of us. So as we're moving forward in contemporary iron art, what was kind of your initial thought with using iron as an artistic medium? And then maybe let's get into how that's developed.
It's hard for me to say exactly because it's so many years ago, but it mainly had to do with advancing my program
Okay.
at the University of Minnesota, and it became a kind of a signature of at least my program in metal casting
Oh, absolutely. Was
sculpture.
it because of the cost of the material or?
Uh, I think, well, that's part of it because the iron
Mhm.
was always, I mean, it the iron was always free because people would dump off radiators and
Yeah.
it would. As a matter of fact, one year we were running out of iron, and a student said, "Well, I know where there's a radiator." And so I said, "Well, go get it." And it turns out that there was a plumbing store a couple blocks away, and they had all these radiators outside that they were trying to sell. This guy just drove up, put one in his truck, and came back. I didn't know about it till afterwards. I went, "No, no, we can't be
Okay.
stealing iron, you know." So,
No.
but it was it had to do with the community,
Okay.
development of community, and people liked it, and it was like a dance, and it was
Mm.
um, it was fun. People had fun, and all that I thought was important to making sculpture. If you're not having fun in your studio, something's wrong.
I've heard that echoed in a couple of other interviews as well. And so one thing that I also think iron offers to people from all different walks of life is the ability to lean into the technicality of it. And so they can be producing their art, but they can also love the mold making process or love the idea of an industrial material or an industrial process that they're kind of taking advantage of, or taking advantage of the historic reference to the material or the ability for the material to rust.
Right. Well, I mean, one of the things about iron is that it's such an essential element in the
Mm-hmm.
universe. It is the
Mm-hmm.
end point of nucleosynthesis,
Mm-hmm.
and it's responsible for life on the planet.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and it's in our bodies, carries the oxygen. It's such a lover of oxygen. Um, so, I, so there's something elemental and kind of very soulful in a way
Mm-hmm.
about iron. It's different than bronze.
In a way, I feel like that can lend a lot to an artistic voice that you have that you're trying to express. So,
I don't know how to phrase it exactly, but uh, I'm interested in work that has a kind of spiritual dimension to it, a kind of spirit about it. That's why I'm interested in Asian and Native American art.
mm-hmm.
I think it comes from a deeper place, and that's where I'm trying to uh, bring my work from a deeper place.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and and I think iron helps you do that because of all the stuff you have to do in order to do it.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's so many things. I remember that my wife was standing at an iron pour, and this was before I was going to be appointed chair of the department. I
Okay.
said yes, and the dean came to this iron pour, and he was talking to one of his aides, and he said, "Well, if he can organize this, he can certainly organize the department." And yeah, it takes a lot of planning and organization and rehearsal and confidence in your students. You know. So I learned a lot about leadership and a lot about um, uh, how to deal with people
Yeah.
uh, through this process, and that was important. It's important to my development as an artist and my development as a teacher.
Yeah.
So I always thought that the making and the teaching that they went together, and that you could always advance your own aesthetic and your own career, and it also advance your own program and your own department and your own university. They weren't mutually exclusive, but they were part of the whole. They were part of the whole process. So and iron was because of its it's in a it's like theater in a way, theater and dance. Um, there's there are movements involved, there are relationships, and you can always tell when the pros from Dover are on the team because nobody needs to talk; they just know what to do, and you can see the body language, the body knowledge uh,
Mm-hmm.
in operation. That was very evident at the Vermilion. That was some really nice iron pours there.
Yeah, there was. It was definitely an honor to be there and a treat to see all of those people working. And it just, now that we're kind of maybe a little bit post-pandemic, I'm really looking forward to the quelch that has, or kind of like the repression that kind of happened during the pandemic of
Right.
travel and of connecting in face to face, to be able to now, I think that us as a community are springing forward with even more fervor. Like there's more iron pours, I feel like, every single weekend
Oh yeah.
than maybe there ever have been. But my knowledge is very limited to like numbers and things like, but I'm very excited about this next chapter and what it has to offer all of us. And
I am as well.
so do you think that this is a good time to maybe talk about what you have hot on the horizon? You
Um,
mentioned maybe earlier a little bit about the panel at SLOS, but
well, I'm still, still I did a bunch of things at the international.
mm-hmm.
Uh, I'm going to hopefully. Well, there's some talk about my doing a smelt down at Sloss. I don't know if that'll come about or not. They haven't told me that. There was some initial discussion with forgetting her name, the woman who runs the arts industry program down there now.
Oh, Lindsay.
Lindsay, that's right.
Mm-hmm.
That's right. Um, and I haven't heard about the panel thing, but I want to keep going to conferences as long as I'm able. And I'm a member of the University of Minnesota Retirees Association, and they give grants for
Oh,
professional development. So I've gotten a lot of money from them since I've been retired to go to
good.
various conferences and to go to. I went to Japan. I went to again to do a workshop. I did went to the international. I did some other things by writing grants to the Retirees Association.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to keep doing those as long as I'm standing. And uh, I've just had to move my studio because of I lost my leaves, gentrification kind of situation.
Mm-hmm.
But now I'm in so right now I'm just totally involved in trying to reorganize a
Yeah.
space. So that's going to take a while. It's going to take a couple of. I mean, I'm all
Yeah.
in, but stuff's in boxes, and
Yeah. Yeah.
so I have to work on that. So, and lately, what I've been doing with my work is I'm not making any big work anymore,
Mm-hmm.
but I've been taking apart old work and kind of rethinking it, and repurpose purposing it, and
Mm-hmm.
managed to place some of my bigger works at sculpture parks. And so I'm still active as an artist. So
Oh yeah.
uh, that's important to me. I have to have a place to go to putz around, just like my childhood basement.
Mm-hmm. So you have been, or I shouldn't start off like that, but so I actually have seen you do two different smelts. Now I wasn't in the workshops, but there was one at the Western in Hayes in 2012, the summer.
Yes, yeah, that was a good smell. You know,
Yeah.
nice steel there. Yeah.
And then there was another one that you did a workshop for at the Metal Museum in maybe
Yes.
2018 or
Yes. Yes.
2019.
Yeah. Tom Geip and we did a tandem. Still kind of processing the loss of my friend.
Mm-hmm.
But I did a smelt and then he did a billeting workshop. So it was kind of our last kind of workshop together. We were longtime canoe partners too. So
Yeah.
yeah. Anyway, I'm doing did a little memorial talk at the international, and I'm going to do another one at the national to
Mm-hmm.
memorial talk about what Tom Geip and his influence in the community and his work. So we'll see about the Tatara. I mean, I've always wanted to be close to my materials. So steel and nickel iron was really important. And as soon as and that came about through a Japanese friend at fourth. international, my friend Takuya. He said, "Well, we'd like to come over and do something. What should we do?" And he said, "Well, how about the Tatara?" And I said, "What's that?" And so that was the start of that. So then I went to Japan, and um, I met through a former student of mine. I met um, uh, Mr. Kihara, who's a national treasure,
Mm-hmm.
and he makes all the steel for Japanese swords in Japan at the Nitho Tatara. So I did one hybrid smelt at Tokyo Institute of Technology on the street
Uh-huh.
with a professor there, and then I went to Shimane Prefecture, and we did a Kodai Tatara, and then I've been back two other times. One time to watch the big one run, the one that makes a couple of tons of steel, and then to participate in the Nimi City Tatara festivals where they run a medieval Tatara, and that's the only one where as a foreigner you can actually work. So
Mm-hmm.
that was fun. So that's 36 hours of work, straight work, and the big one is 72 hours of work.
So one of the things that I've witnessed two different times. So once at the Western that just happened in Vermilion, but also at the Metal Museum in Memphis, I think in 2019 was you honor the poor at the
Yeah,
end. Can
it's
you
a
tell me a little bit about that tradition that you've
yeah,
started?
it's my friend Takuya Kasugi. I finally remembered his last name. Takuya Kasugi. He is um, a good friend of mine in Japan, and he said, in Japan we have this little thing that we do when things are success. And I said, well, what's that? He said, well, we get around in a circle and we kind of get down like this, and we do this little clap, and then we go hi, which means yes at the end. And so I thought, oh, that's kind of nice. It kind of puts puts a kind of finishing celebration on something, and it brings people together again in a circle. And I
Yeah.
it was important as a metaphor for the iron community. And so I just started doing that, and it's spread around a little bit. Some people do it, some people don't. But whenever I'm there, I try to 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 coax people into doing this little
Oh
ritual.
yeah.
Yeah,
And I think that the general consensus, the ones of us that know what's going on are like, oh yeah, come on, come on, come on, guys. And then it spreads that way. But I remember in Memphis, which is the first time that I'd really poured at the same time that you were on the pour floor. And you said, so we'll do the clap and then we say hi, which means, like you said, yes, but also it's how we're feeling right now.
exactly.
And I've never forgot that.
Yeah, it's a double meaning.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And so beautiful, like a great metaphor for the relief and joy at the end, though, because it's
yeah.
the thing that, we all. So I was actually just at SIU Carbondale
Oh
last
yeah,
weekend, or like what is today is like Tuesday. So it was like 3 days ago or 4 days
yeah,
ago or something.
yeah.
There was there's some really great grad students there right now. So I was just there and it was just, like the perfect weather, it's the thing that we all look forward to the day of the pour. But then at a certain point, you're like looking at the floor, like, how many molds are left? Because I'm ready to be done. There's that
Uh,
moment.
I call it the sudden appearance of molds at the beginning of the pour. Like, where are all the molds? And all of a sudden, wait, where did all these molds come from?
Yeah, there's like a pallet under a
It's
tarp
magic.
somewhere that all of a sudden gets switched out. Yeah. And so then when you're done and dropped bottom and everybody's like sweaty and taking off their hard hats, and then you're like, yes, we did it. All the vents popped and everybody had a good time and no one was hurt. So yeah, I think that little culmination moment, you know, sends out a good spirit and sends out good vibes.
I
And
agree.
I hope that it grows. I hope that
Yeah.
it continues. So, um, So I would be very interested, and I know other community members are interested to know if you have any advice for us. And you've already given us a great amount of advice throughout this whole time we've been chatting.
You just have to keep making. I mean, it's important. I try to do something in my studio just about every day. I'm not there every day, but I do take days off. And when I go fishing and canoeing, of course, though Tom and I did, well, one year we cast aluminum in the boundary waters, and then one year we cast bronze, and then one year we actually did a smelt in the boundary waters,
Mm,
a really tiny smelt. But when I'm canoeing, then I'm not in the studio, but or fishing, I'm not in the studio. But it's important to do something, to
yeah.
be engaged, to keep after it. You
Yeah.
know,
And I feel like those moments when you're out in very immersed in nature, that's as important to an artistic
oh,
practice
it's yeah, it's very
as
important for my work. Very important for my work. A lot of my images are about canoeing and
hmm
um, so fishing's like art making.
hmm
You can go if you're a commercial fisher, you go with big nets to try to catch as much fish as possible.
Okay.
But a sport fisher goes with a minimum amount of equipment into the unknown water
Okay.
with hopes of catching the big one.
Huh.
And that's like art. You're fishing in unknown water. Because what do artists do but make their own problems and solve their own problems? And that's important.
hmm
Important. And to keep learning. That's the main thing. As long as you're upright and learning, you're alive, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I was gonna try and prompt you with some of these after show questions, and maybe we can pick a good
Sure.
after show topic.
Okay.
So we've got what's your favorite? So I'm just gonna list them off, and if something piques your interest, we'll say, oh, we'll stop on that. But I'm gonna list them pretty quickly. So, your favorite place to pour iron, or a favorite iron pour memory, or now, not everybody likes to talk about a bad thing that happened, but we do have like what's the most scared you've ever been, or we could take the route of a funny story that you remember from an iron pour, or if you want to talk about any specific tools or types of molds.
Uh, I have a I have a kind of funny story about an iron pour that happened at the Urbana conference in St. Louis.
Oh, okay. Let me write. I'm gonna write that down so I
Yeah.
don't forget Abana at St. Louis. And I'm very intrigued already. Um, And so we'll say goodbye to the public audience. But I actually have like a question that is kind of might be polarizing. So I'm asking it to you at the end. In the community right now, I hear, and I don't know like really how to bring it up, but basically there's this concept that I keep hearing and repeated that iron programs are being killed by administration. Iron programs are dying, they're dying out, programs are closing, they won't have iron anymore. And I'll tell you my opinion is that, and I'm also like a hopeful, romantic, optimistic, but I try and say that, okay, so every big iron program that's been shut down for whatever reason, mine personally, I went to the University of Georgia with Jimbo, and when he was done doing iron,
Yeah.
he stopped doing iron, and he wasn't getting, the support from the administration. But I think that all of us children that learned from our professors are going out and spreading iron to where, so it's like for every iron program that closes, are there other ones that open that there wasn't iron there before? And you could see
I think
that.
it's I think it's a shift.
Mm,
I think that some universities are under pressure from their attorney wings
hmm
because it's thought to be dangerous.
Hmm.
They're worried about injuries and suits and stuff like that
Yeah.
in our litigious society. Um, and in my case, it's just the department decided not to hire a metal caster.
Mm.
Uh, and I don't know. I think I know the reason for that, but I don't want to speculate at this point. So, when you talk to students about where should I go to graduate school, it's really has to do with who's teaching there
Yeah.
and what are they engaged in, and how active are they as artists, and how active are they in the national or the international community. Um, so that's important. So I think it's just shifted. I think it's shifting to places like Sculpture Trails and
Mm.
uh, Joe Bigley out in West Virginia and some other places that are connect.
But there's also like the Salem artworks. They have
Right, yeah.
um
So more uh, community-based organizations that aren't necessarily related to academia.
mm-hmm.
Might be happening in academia. I don't know.
Hmm.
It's certainly the case at the University of Minnesota. Uh, so, and I think what's very curious is that since World War II,
Hmm.
American sculptors have been working very hard to get rid of the European model, which was the artist designed this little model and then it was sent to the foundry or to
Yeah.
craftsmen who then executed the work.
Yeah.
And because all of these GIs coming back from World War II said, hey, we've just been through, we can do this stuff. We just had to do a whole lot of stuff on our own with limited materials. We can cast metal. That was Julius Schmidt. He was in the Navy in World War II. He
Yeah.
said, we can do this. And so uh, the idea that as an artist, you can control every aspect of the process is important, I think, for the result, just in the fact that, boy, I can mess this up. And what will happen if I do this?
Yeah.
If I throw water into the, what happened if I purposely pour into a wet mold? I just did that uh, in April to try to, for the thing I did for the Berlin project.
Hmm.
Uh, so that, and now it's going right back, at least at my school, it's going right back. The technician is running the kind of the class, and the professor knows absolutely nothing about metal casting, absolutely
Mm.
zero.
Hmm.
And so it's going right back to the English model or the European model
Mm.
of art education. I don't like that particularly, but
Hmm.
that might just be the way it's going to be. I don't know.
Maybe in some instances.
Yeah, I like hands on. I think, you know, hands are, well, the hand speaks to the brain same way that the brain speaks to the hand. They're equal partners. And that's important. Uh, I think that's really important. Uh,
But I think that like so a specific example, I'm going to call him out, but Toby Flores, who I have to have on the show, we're just
oh
trying
yeah,
to find a time to make it happen, but he came from an iron. He went to undergrad, I think, at SIU Carbondale.
right,
And then now he's teaching at Fort Hays, Kansas.
right.
From what I understand, there was not iron in Fort Hays, Kansas.
No, no,
And he brought it there, and then now it's one of the premier
oh yeah, he's
iron
got a brand new
schools.
studio and a vibrant graduate program. I just sent a couple of Minnesotans down there to Kansas
Oh yeah.
that were uh, they weren't exactly. I knew them as students, but they weren't my students. But
Yeah.
we got to be friends and colleagues and so on. So
Yeah.
they're both down there, both women.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, uh, that's good. I think,
Is one of them Cassie?
huh?
Is one
Yeah,
of them Cassie?
Cassie Redmond and Carly Odegaard.
Yeah. Oh yeah, because I met them both well, I've known Cassie for a while, but I'm actually interviewing Cassie tomorrow night.
Oh, great.
Well,
Good. Terrific.
Not that you need me to tell her you say hi, but I'm going to tell her you
Yeah,
say hi.
you say hi.
Yeah. But that's what I just try and tell people is like, don't be disheartened by all these programs closing. Like the fact that UGA doesn't have iron now. I mean, yeah, I guess I'm sad, but it's also like all of us went out and are keeping on spreading the
Exactly.
material, the knowledge and
Keep,
connecting. And
keeping the flame alive.
yeah, I just wanted to know from your perspective, like, do you think that iron is suffering, the iron community is suffering because of these like academic kind of limitations and maybe eradications?
I really don't think so.
Okay.
People ask me, "Are you sad about that in Minnesota?" And I said, "Well, art departments go up, and art departments go down."
Yeah.
And I mean, when I was looking for graduate schools, the top two programs were University of Iowa,
Mm-hmm.
Cranbrook Academy.
Yeah.
You don't hear anything about those programs anymore in Scotia.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
it's all a function of who's there as artists doing what.
Yeah.
That's it. So I'm not pessimistic. I
Uh-huh.
think it's just a shift.
Yeah. Because my undergrad and grad is actually both in metalsmithing and artisanry. And then in grad school, I just happened to stumble into like a large scale casting class with Jimbo, and like the rest is history. But when I was applying for grad schools, they said, God bless my undergrad professors for encouraging me to apply for grad school and all of that. But they said, don't even bother applying for Cranbrook because you won't get in because you're not as mature of an artist as they're looking for, and also it's very conceptual and you're a more technical and like yeah, that it was so it was it's very interesting too, because even if there is a premier school, it might still not be the school for you based on your work and what you're interested in developing. So
Exactly. Exactly.
yeah. Okay, well, on that note, let's go on over to the after show. And so we'll say goodbye to the public audience. So yeah. Wayne, thank you so much for letting me interview
Uh,
you for the show.
my pleasure. It's been a great fun.
Great. Yeah, and I can't wait to hear about Abana in St. Louis. And
Okay.
so for everybody that's listening and watching, thanks so much for tuning in. I hope you really enjoyed this episode with Wayne, and we'll see you in the next one. Thank you so much for tuning in today. Well, there you have it, the story of how and why Wayne Potratz started casting iron. Wayne has played such an integral part in establishing the cast iron art field and its resulting family-like community of artists. This interview was tremendously inspirational and informational for me, and it truly shows how much thanks we owe to Wayne and the other founders of this cast iron art movement. Wayne, thank you again for your time and this interview. Many, many people in the cast iron art community have had the privilege of learning from you as students or fellow practitioners, and I unfortunately had not yet had the chance to. And so therefore, this conversation has helped me get to know you better and also has aided in fleshing out the history of cast iron as an artistic material. And I know I'm not alone when I say that your story is a gift and you continue to be an inspiration to us all. And now for one last word of thanks to our top supporter, Sloss Metal Arts, for supporting this show and helping me capture these snapshots of our community members as they recount their iron ore origin stories. And of course, I truly look forward to seeing everyone this year at Sloss for the national conference this upcoming April 5th through the 9th. So thank you, Sloss Metal Arts, for supporting this podcast, as well as all of our other supporters over on Patreon. And the funds that they support me with are invaluable to help me continue producing these episodes. So in return for their support on Patreon, I offer the private after show recordings for each episode. And by now, you probably know that it's an extra 15 to 20 minutes with each show's guest where we talk a little more candidly and share at least one more story. So if you're listening and you would also like access to the after show for as little as $1 a month, go to our Patreon page, which is patreon.com/podcastiron. And there you can choose a contribution level that fits within your budget. But supporters at any level get access to the after show from each episode. But if you don't have it in your budget to support the Podcast Iron on Patreon, that's okay. Instead, if you could share this podcast with someone you think would be interested in listening or watching, and I will appreciate that just as much. Anything and everything helps. And for that I say thank you from the bottom of my heart. And if you want to get in touch with me, you can email me at thepodcastiron@gmail.com. Thanks again for listening and watching. I'm sending you all my love always, and I can't wait to share the next episode with you. Like really, I can't. It's going to be great. I'll talk to you soon, and have a great day.